Some Kabbalistic methods for achieving restoration focused on praying to and meditating on the names of God. Kabbalists associated a different name of God with each Sephirah. They believe that meditating on the divine names associated with the Sephirah, the energy flowing through the Sephirah, is activated. They said that simply meditating on the divine names, however, will not produce results. This practice must be accompanied by good deeds. Joseph Gicatella says that our good deeds stimulate God's blessings to descend until they reach Malkut, the Sephirah closest to the physical world. Malkut, brimming with God's energy, is then able to meet our rewards to the righteous on earth. On the other hand, our negative actions are disastrous, for they block the flow of energy to this world, and thus God's children are left hungry, thirsty, naked, and totally deprived. Like many mystics of the world's religions, Kabbalists recognize the extraordinary power of the divine names. 13th century Kabbalist Rabbi Moses ben Shimon of Burgos says that those prophets who concentrated intensely in deed and in thought, and whose pure thoughts cleaved to the rock of the world with purity and great cleanliness, received an influx of the supernal inner emanations by virtue of the divine names to perform miraculous actions in physical things, working changes in nature. Rabbi Judah Albertini says that the use of God's name is so powerful that Moses saved Israel by invoking them. With the power of the divine names which Moses pronounced in his prayers, says Albertini, he was able to turn back the anger and fury. Gicatella says Moses learned the secret utterance of God's name from the ministering angels when he went up on high. The Kabbalist techniques for meditating on the divine names often involved complex letter combinations of those names. The Greater Hihalat, a text of Merkabah mysticism that dates back to the first century, speaks of letters, combinations, and names of God that can be repeated much like a mantra to bring the devotee into a mystical state. 13th century Kabbalist Abraham Abulafia instructed his disciples to write, pronounce, and meditate on the combinations that are formed when the letters of the names of God are combined with other letters. They were to do this along with certain body motions and breathing techniques. Abulafia says teaching on the divine names is based on the tradition of the patriarchs and prophets. The statement in Genesis 12:8 that Abraham called in the name of God is traditionally interpreted to mean that Abraham prayed to or praised God. But Abulafia and his fellow Kabbalists claim that Abraham literally pronounced God's name and that he attained the highest mystical levels by doing so. Some who practice Abulafia's system had profound mystical experiences. One of Abulafia's students twice wrote that he saw light emanating from within himself. This anonymous student, whom some scholars believe to be Gicatella, described his first mystical experience in his book, Sha'ar Tzedek. The third night after midnight, I nodded off a little, quill in hand and paper on my knees. Then I noticed that the candle was about to go out. I rose to put it right, as oftentimes happens to a person awake. Then I saw that the light continued. I was greatly astonished as though after close examinations I saw that it issued from myself. I said, I do not believe it. I walked to and fro all through the house, and behold, the light is with me. I lay on a couch and covered myself up, and behold, the light is with me all the while. Other Quabblists who use the Boulafaya system had similar experience. Isaac of Aco writes, in the third watch, when I was half asleep, I saw the house in which I was sleeping full of a light, which was very sweet and pleasant. For this light was not like the light which emanates from the sun, but was bright as the light of day, which is the light of dawn before the sun rises. And this light was before me for about 3 hours. And I hastened to open my eyes to see whether the dawn had broken or not, so that I might rise and pray. And I saw that it was yet night, and I returned to my sleep with joy. In the 16th century, Luria taught a system of meditation on God's names called Yuhinden, unifications. His exercises usually consisted of contemplating combinations of the letters of two or more names of God. As we have seen, some Quabblists not only meditated on the divine names, but also recited them. Yet, despite early traditions of pronouncing God's names, Quabblists have been generally cautious about doing so. Some claim that the light that is drawn down when we say these names is tremendous, and in most cases too much for us to handle. According to Luria, only those who are free from sin dare pronounce the divine names and go unpunished by God. He says that early Quabblists were able to recite the names of God because they could cleanse themselves from defilement with the ashes of the red heifer, but that this cleansing is no longer possible. Similarly, Moses Luzzatto says that repeating God's names mentally or verbally can be done only by a holy individual, one who has attained a high degree of closeness and attachment to God. Summarizing the view of most Quabblists, R.E.A. Kaplan writes, the name is used primarily as a meditative device to bring the individual into certain states of consciousness, transposing him to the proper spiritual framework, whether for prophecy or for direct spiritual energy in other ways. Since all the divine names are extremely potent, one must extremely careful to use them except in the proper context and in the most serious manner. The warning of the Kabbalists has merit, for when we say a name of God, we do not tap into a tremendous source of power. But today, God has provided us with a safe way to access the power of His divine names. First, as an ongoing foundation for reciting the names of God, we should strive to live in accordance with the will of God and His laws. When we do transgress spiritual laws, we can return to center by confessing our transgressions and performing self imposed penances for our misdeeds. Unconfessed sin compromises our relationship to our higher self. It also compromises our opportunity to access the power of God through the Sephirah and the divine names. Kabbalah, like many religious traditions, teach that confusion is an integral part of the spiritual path. The Tao tells us that each evening when we are lying in bed, we should confess to God every sin we have committed during the day, not omitting a single sin or fine point that one transgressed. Second, we can prepare to recite the names of God by establishing a strong aura of spiritual protection around ourselves and by purifying our chakras. We can best accomplish spiritual protection and purification with an accelerated form of prayer known as the Science of the Spoken Word. When we practice this prayer technique under the sponsorship of the Ascended Masters, God is equipping us and encouraging us to use His names to call forth light where it is most needed on earth.